Welcome back to AM Agenda. Joining me this morning, Tanya Plibersek and the Senator Helen Coonan. Today, the Senate is due to pass the government's renewable energy target. Yesterday, we saw the coalition and the government come to an agreement over this. Both sides seem to be claiming victory. Tanya Plibersek, do you think this bodes well for negotiations on the ETS?
Well, I certainly hope so. I think that the renewable energy target is an important step in reducing our impact on our planet, but I think it is absolutely critical that we pass a carbon pollution reduction scheme as well. We obviously wanted to see security in the renewable energies industry, and for that reason we decoupled this legislation. But to really tackle climate change, we need both of these measures.
The government gave quite a few concessions to the coalition on this, didn't you? The coalition's spokesman Greg Hunt came out yesterday and said they've got 80 to 90% of the amendments that they were after.
Well, I'm sure Greg Hunt's making the best of the situation as far as his party is concerned. The real question is about the disunity within the Liberals and Nationals about carbon change policy, whether climate change exists at all, whether it's man-made, whether they'll support a carbon pollution reduction scheme, whether they'll vote for it in November, whether they want to delay it even further, having had 12 years to discuss it, whether they want to delay it even further. I think, you know, good luck to Greg for making the best of the situation. We are very happy to have this legislation through. It would be interesting to know whether people in his party room are happy to see him out there, pleased that the legislation's passing.
Well, Senator, that's a whole lot of questions that Tanya Plibersek just raised there about your position on the emissions trading scheme and climate change generally. Are you confident that after these negotiations with the government that you might be able to come to some sort of agreement by November?
Well, can I first of all just say that I think it's, there should be credit on both sides, quite frankly, for actually coming to the table and discussing something that's going to have such profound consequences. And we have always said we support the principle of renewable energy, and so these set of negotiations have been acceptable to the whole party room. Now, that's really the key, is to get acceptable positions to the whole party room. And I think the fact that it has just been done and was unanimously adopted is very clear evidence that it can be done. It's a matter of what you're agreeing to, of course, and we've been very clear that the CPRS, the way it was presented, the way that bill was presented to the Parliament, was not something we could support because it didn't really achieve the objectives that it sought out to do, and we always said our preference was that we should wait and see how we could align with the rest of the world in order to have a sensible outcome rather than just one where you'd have to either make some changes or you didn't really know what you were trying to achieve in the first place if it was wrong. So what we have said is that there are 9 principles. We've made them very clear, and we've also said that we'd like to have some discussions with the government around those principles and in relation to amendments that are being drawn up to see if this, dog of a bill can actually be kicked into shape so that we could have a look at it.
Will the government negotiate without actual amendments?
Well, it's just impossible. It's, Helen's saying we want better policy. It's the vibe. It's like something out of The Castle. The idea that you'd put out these vague principles and say this is our negotiating position. There is legislation. The opposition has to put up amendments to the legislation.
When will they be ready?
The amendments are obviously very technical, and clearly they've got to be right. So I'm not actually in charge of them, so I'm not going to be giving commitments about when the amendments will be available. But the principles are clear enough for discussions to take place about, working out what falls to the bottom, what you can actually negotiate about. And I think it's very unfortunate that there's been an intransigent attitude on the part of the government in not even coming to the table when we have said repeatedly that we would like to sit down and see if there is some way in which this bill, which is fatally flawed the way it stands, can be improved.
Well, we look forward to the Senate ruling on this today, and I'm sure there'll be a lot more negotiations with the Climate Change Minister Penny Wong on this over the coming months. I do just need to move on. We're running out of time. Minister, I just want to have a look at an issue that's in your portfolio. The opposition's been really hammering the government over the last few days in question time, calling on you to rule out a new tax on the sale of the family home. As the Housing Minister, is that something the government's considering?
Well, look, this is all based on a story that was in The Australian that the Treasurer has very clearly said is a fantasy.
But he hasn't ruled it out.
He has said that we are not considering a capital gains tax on the family home. There is no proposal with the government considering that at the moment. He's also said that there's going to be 100 stories that come out of the Henry Review with various political parties, journalists, other sources saying, will you rule in, will you rule out? We simply can't do that at every stage. This is an independent review. It's the biggest review of the tax system in 50 years. It will have wide-ranging proposals. They won't all be adopted by the government. This is an independent review. And we're not going to comment every 5 minutes about...
The government has ruled out a couple of other tax changes to do with the GST and some super changes.
And we said that at the very beginning when we were setting the parameters for Dr Henry to go out and consider what was going to be in his review. We said, we want you to look root and branch, whole tax system, couple of things off limit. We're not going to do that at every stage. Can I just say about housing though, there are two things that we've tried to do in housing policy. Increase housing supply, help first home buyers back into the market. We have been phenomenally successful
on housing. That's the problem.
Sorry, Helen.
The Treasurer has made it coming out of the
opposition. What we've got here, as Tanya said, is we have got a root and branch tax review. Now, that is code for everything is on the table unless it's ruled out. And over the last few days, we've seen the most extraordinary performance. Tanya and the Treasurer and the Prime Minister dancing around the issue as to whether or not they are going to put a tax on the family home. They haven't ruled out a tax on the family home. They haven't ruled out capital gains tax. They haven't ruled out inheritance tax. And we know that Labor has form on putting a tax on housing. And it's a very serious
golden
issue.
Retrievers either. It doesn't mean it's going to happen.
Tanya has an opportunity right here, right now, right on agenda to rule out a tax on the family home, and I invite her to do it. Otherwise, we'll be entitled to consider that it's still on the table.
Final words,
Helen, we have said really clearly 50 times over the last week that the reports in The Australian are fanciful.
So rule it out.
Well, I've just said that the reports of a capital gains tax on the family home...
The government will not be putting a tax on family houses, and we will believe you.
I'd love to rule anything in and out if I had a chance to get a word in, Helen. We have said very clearly that the reports in The Australian that say that there is a proposal for the government to put a capital gains tax on the family home are wrong, are fantasy.
But Helen Coonan's point here is that you're saying the reports are wrong, but you're not ruling out the actual tax.
The Henry Review is an independent review. I don't know what they are going to recommend.
Well, I'm sure in question time today you can look forward to more questions along those lines. Tanya Plibersek, Helen Coonan, thanks for joining me this morning.
Thank you. Thanks, Ashley. Thanks, Helen.
And David Spears will be with you at 4:15 Eastern this afternoon for PM Agenda. The Foreign Minister, Stephen Smith, will be joining him to give some reaction to the terrible news we've seen come out of Iraq overnight. So do stay with him for that. I'll be back with you tomorrow morning for AM Agenda. Until then, I'm Ashley Gillen. Thanks for your company.